Welcome to Disruptive Adventism. My name is Jose Briones, and I'll be your host for this podcast. This podcast is about discussing the polemical statements and practices that are part of the Adventist fabric, which in turn shape this belief system to be unique and relevant for today's society. During today's podcast, we will be touching on the topic of Activeism. As you can notice in the title, it is a bit of a different spelling than your regular dictionary entry. That is because we will not only be commenting about the political and social nature of activism, but the life perspective as a whole. Activism, we believe, is the idea that life is in constant flow, and as the saying goes, we either move or we die. Our deglossing of activism today will be an introduction to the topic, and we will follow it with a discussion later on another podcast. We will also see today what are some of the reasons Scripture calls us to be active. So, let us begin. One of the main ideas behind Adventism is that it is a movement. As a movement and not a simple church, Adventism is not static. It is not enclosed in a building. It moves, it generates energy, it creates change. That is why Adventism is activist. Adventism believes in the idea of being an agent of change in the world, in all areas of life: political, social, mental, spiritual. The life that is not active is, by contrast, passive, or static at the very least. And as Adventists, we cannot stay put and satisfied with the lack of flow, let it be an understanding of the truth or society's problems. Throughout the 19th century, many of the early Adventists got involved in issues of political nature and free speech. Fast forward to the 21st century, and there are still Adventist believers who are supporting political change in support of immigrants, marginalized individuals, and as Jesus calls them, the least of these. The nature of Adventism is to be an active force of change, a movement of people changing the fabric of society for the betterment of it. But Adventism is not only focused on political and social change. Spiritual impact is also something that is necessary. Adventism believes that God is not an impersonal being, but a person whom we can interact with. As a result, Adventism seeks to be active in the spiritual areas of life. Prayer, meditation, study of the sacred text are all necessary to grow as a person and learn more about what the Lord desires us to do. For Adventists, the scripture calls us to activity and not passivity. As we have shared, passivity for Adventism is synonymous with death. If you're not seeking, moving, and being an agent for change, our abilities start to decrease. Before we go into our last point of today's podcast, we want to make clear that activism and movement does not necessarily mean to always be moving or doing something. An essential part of being active is paradoxically rest. As Adventists, we believe there is a time for rest in our lives, a time to have an active encounter with God through nature, fellowship, food, and also sleep. Taking care of ourselves is being active, just as going out to the streets and helping others. As we close for today's podcast, we want to touch on a story from the text that reflects the idea of activism. Luke 10 reports that Jesus said the following: "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by the other side. So too, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day, he took out 2 denarii and gave it to the innkeeper. 'Look after him,' he said, 'and when I return, I'll reimburse you for any extra expense you may have.'" As you notice, activism is about doing something for those who have been hurt and not just watching the injustices of this world. Activism for Adventists is to engage in the world, in politics, social action, spirituality, and health. Adventism has changed our lives because it has invited us to engage with the world and not just being a bystander, even if it comes at a personal loss, like the Samaritan. Thank you for listening today. I hope that we have intrigued you a little bit with our deglossing of activism today, and that you decide to stay around for future podcasts and conversations. If you have any comments, feedback, or a topic you would like to discuss, please go to our website at www.disruptiveadventism.org or shoot us an email to disruptiveadventism@gmail.com. We're eager to engage in discussions about any matter, so don't hesitate to contact us. This has been it for today. We hope you join us next time, and as always, we invite you to be disruptive.